The dust of redemption, Texas, settled on everything, a fine red powder that clung to hope and sorrow alike. For Ilara, it was the color of a new beginning, a blanket over the life she had run from. 3 years she'd been in this town. Her little seamstress shop, a fragile fortress built of needle and thread. She was quiet, known for her gentle hands and the sad, distant look that sometimes clouded her blue eyes. The townsfolk were kind, but they kept a respectful distance, sensing a story she wasn't ready to tell. Ilara was grateful for that. The past was a ghost, and she had no desire to invite it in for tea. Her world was small, contained within the 4 walls of her shop and the dusty street she could see from her window. From that window, she often watched the blacksmith, Caleb. He was a man forged from the same fire and iron he worked with, strong, silent, and carrying a heat within him that few dared to get close to. Like her, he was an island. He'd arrived a year after she had, bought the old smithy, and worked from sunup to sundown. His hammer's rhythm a steady heartbeat for the town. He spoke when spoken to, his voice a low rumble, but he never started a conversation. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held the same shadows she felt in her own soul. An unspoken understanding existed between them, a recognition of shared solitude. He would sometimes find a freshly baked roll left on his anvil in the morning, and she would find a loose shutter on her shop, mysteriously repaired overnight. They were 2 lonely ships, passing in the vast, harsh ocean of the frontier, acknowledging each other with a silent dip of their flags. To want more felt like a betrayal of the safety they had both so carefully constructed. But the world rarely lets peace last. His name was Bartholomew Blackwood, a man who saw the town not as a community, but as a collection of assets to be acquired. He had a plump face, a tight suit, and eyes that held the cold glitter of a fresh coin. He wanted Ilara's shop. It was situated on a prime corner, and he had plans. One afternoon he stepped inside, the little bell above the door announcing his unwelcome presence. He didn't bother to browse her wares. "Miss Ilara," he began, his voice smooth and oily. "I've made you a generous offer for this property." "And I have politely declined, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her hands not stopping their work of mending a farmer's shirt. "This shop is my life. Everything has a price," he sneered, stepping closer. "Perhaps you're not understanding the benefits of cooperating with me. This is a rough town. A woman alone. Things can happen, accidents." A cold fear, sharp and familiar, pierced through Ilara's carefully woven peace. It was the voice of a man who believed the world belonged to him, the same kind of voice she had fled from. She stood up, her small frame trembling slightly. "I'm not selling." "Please leave!" Blackwood laughed, a short, ugly sound. He reached out and swept a box of buttons off her counter, scattering them across the floor. "Think about my offer," he said, turning to leave. Just as he reached the door, it was blocked by a large frame. Caleb stood there, his leather apron smudged with soot, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at Blackwood. There was no anger in his expression, just a flat, heavy stillness that was more menacing than any threat. Blackwood's confidence faltered. He tried to puff out his chest, but next to the blacksmith, he looked like a spoiled child. After a tense moment, he scurried around Caleb and disappeared into the street. The silence that filled the shop was heavy. Ilara knelt, her hands shaking as she began to pick up the scattered buttons. Caleb entered, his large boots surprisingly quiet on the wooden floor. He knelt opposite her, his large, calloused fingers gently picking up the tiny pieces of pearl and wood. "Thank you," Ilara whispered, not daring to look at him. "A man like that only understands one thing," Caleb said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "He'll be back." "I know," she said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He placed the buttons he'd collected into her palm, his fingers brushing against hers. A jolt, warm and electric, shot up her arm. She looked up, and for the first time their eyes truly met. She saw the storm in his, but beneath it she saw a flicker of something else, a deep, aching loneliness that matched her own. In that moment, she knew she wasn't just afraid of Blackwood. She was afraid of the hope this man ignited in her. Hope was a dangerous thing. It was, after all, hope that had almost gotten her killed. Their silent treaty was broken. From that day on, the space between them was no longer filled with quiet understanding, but with a crackling, unspoken longing. Caleb made it a point to be near his forge's open door whenever Blackwood was in town, his presence a silent warning. Ilara found herself baking an extra loaf of bread every morning, leaving it on his doorstep before the sun was fully risen. They started to talk. In short, hesitant sentences that carried the weight of whole paragraphs. He'd ask about her day, and she'd ask if his forge was hot enough. It was a language of small things, but it was theirs. She learned that the deep scar above his right eyebrow was from a thrown horseshoe, and he learned that she preferred the smell of lavender over roses. One evening, as she was closing her shop, he was waiting for her, holding a small, clumsily wrapped package. "For you," he mumbled, holding it out. Inside was a set of new scissors, the steel polished to a mirror shine, the handles shaped with a grace that only a master smith could achieve. They felt perfectly balanced in her hand. "They're beautiful, Caleb," she breathed, her heart aching with an emotion she couldn't name. "How can I ever thank you?" "No thanks needed," he said, looking at the ground. The old ones looked worn, he had noticed. He had noticed the small details of her life, the tools of her trade. The thought made her feel both seen and terrifyingly vulnerable. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking at the dark shape of the smithy, a single lamp glowing within. She thought of the man she had run from, Jedediah. He was a man of contracts and ownership. His touch was cold, his words were commands. He had looked at her and seen a pretty possession. Caleb looked at her and saw that her scissors were worn. The difference was as vast as the prairie sky. Caleb, too, was awake. He hammered at a piece of glowing iron, the sparks flying into the darkness like angry fireflies. Every strike was a blow against his past. He had ridden with his older brother, Silas, for nearly 10 years. They were the Kane brother gang, feared from Kansas to the territories. But Caleb's heart had never been in it. The guilt from their last job, a bank robbery where a young clerk had been needlessly shot, was a poison in his blood. He had left that night, ridden until his horse gave out, and sworn never to touch a gun again. Redemption was more than the name of a town. It was his prayer, his penance, but Ilara made him feel things he thought were long dead. She made him want a future, a life beyond mere atonement. And that scared him more than any lawman. How could a man with a past like his dare to stand in the light of someone so good? He was a shadow, and shadows only brought darkness. Blackwood, true to Caleb's word, did not give up. He couldn't use physical intimidation with Caleb always watching, so he used whispers. He spread rumors that Ilara's fabrics were shoddy, that she overcharged. Business at her shop began to slow. The friendly smiles of the townswomen were replaced with looks of suspicion. Ilara felt the chill of isolation creeping back in, a cold she knew all too well. She grew thinner, the shadows under her eyes deepening. Caleb saw it all, and a slow, hot rage began to burn in him. This was his fault. By getting close to her, he had made her a target. One night, a storm rolled in, the thunder rattling the windows of the small town. Driven by a desperate need to protect her, Caleb went to her shop. He found her inside, sitting in the dark, her head in her hands. "Ilara," he said softly from the doorway. She looked up, her face pale in the flashes of lightning. "They all believe him," she whispered. "I'm losing everything, again." He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her, taking her small, cold hands in his own. "You won't lose it. I won't let you. Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why do you care?" The question hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. He looked at her, at the tear-streaked face lit by the storm, and the dam he had built around his heart finally broke. "Because," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I look at you, I forget to be ashamed of who I am. Because you're the first good thing I've wanted in a lifetime of bad choices." He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry, filled with all the words they hadn't said. It was a confession. It was a plea. Ilara's hands came up to cup his face, her fingers tracing the scar above his eye. For a moment, there was no past, no fear, only the raw, undeniable truth of their connection in the heart of the storm. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. The chasm of their secrets still lay between them, but for the first time it seemed possible to cross. "Caleb," she began, ready to tell him everything, to unburden her soul. But a sudden, violent crash from the back of the shop shattered the moment. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, pushing Alara behind him. Two of Blackwood's hired thugs had kicked in the back door, their faces cruel in the dim light. "Blackwood sends his regards," one of them snarled. "He said it's time you learned your lesson." What happened next was a blur of motion. Caleb didn't fight like a town blacksmith. He moved with a brutal, efficient economy that spoke of 100 desperate brawls. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled violence. It was over in less than a minute. The two men were left groaning on the floor, and Caleb stood over them, his chest heaving. He turned to look at Alara, and the ferocity in his eyes was replaced by a look of pure anguish. She was staring at him, not at the defeated men, but at him. She wasn't seeing a protector. She was seeing a violent, dangerous man. The very kind of man she had run from. "Alara!" He started, taking a step toward her. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement, but it was like a knife to his heart. He had shown her the monster inside him. The shadow had finally touched her. Without another word, he turned and walked out into the storm, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her shop and their fragile, burgeoning love. The chasm between them was now wider and deeper than ever before. The days that followed were filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. Caleb locked himself in his smithy, the clang of his hammer an angry, relentless noise that echoed through the town from dawn until well past midnight. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just worked, punishing the steel as if it were his own soul. He had seen the fear in Alara's eyes, and it had confirmed his deepest terror. He was poison. Everything he touched, he ruined. Alara, for her part, cleaned up her shop with a numb efficiency. She boarded the broken door and swept up the shattered pottery, but she couldn't sweep away the image of Caleb's face in the fight, the cold, hard mask of a man who knew violence intimately. It terrified her, but beneath the fear was a confusing, stubborn ache. The man who had fought with such brutality was the same man who had crafted her a pair of delicate scissors, the same man whose touch had felt like coming home. Her heart was at war with her mind. The town, hearing of the attack, rallied around her. The women who had been swayed by Blackwood's rumors now came to her shop with mending and apologies. They had misjudged her, but their kindness felt hollow. The one person she desperately wanted to see remained hidden behind a wall of fire and steel. The fragile piece of redemption was about to be shattered completely. Two riders came into town. One was a tall, imposing man with a cruel smile and eyes as cold as a snake's. The other was slighter, with a well-tailored suit and the arrogant posture of a man who owned the world. The first man made his way to the smithy. He kicked the door open, a cloud of dust and sunlight invading Caleb's smoky sanctuary. Well, the man drawled. "Look what I found. My little brother, playing blacksmith." "It's Silas, in case you forgot your own blood." Caleb froze, his hammer held aloft. The past had just walked through his door, Silas. His older brother, the devil who had led him down the path to ruin. "What do you want, Silas?" Caleb's voice was gravel. "What I always want, money. There's a train coming through, loaded with payroll. I need my best man. I need you." "I'm done with that life," Caleb said, turning back to his anvil. "Silas left." "Are you? I heard you got sweet on the little seamstress. Pretty thing. It'd be a shame if the whole town, and especially her, found out that the quiet blacksmith used to be the infamous Cain killer, wouldn't it?" The hammer fell from Caleb's hand, clattering on the stone floor. Silas's threat was a blade pointed directly at the one good thing in his life. Meanwhile, the second man, Jedediah, walked directly into Alara's shop. The bell tinkled, and her head snapped up. Her blood ran cold. It was him. The man she had been promised to. The man she had left at the altar. "Alara, my dear," Jedediah said, his smile a predator's grin. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever? Our contract is binding. You are my wife, and you are coming home." Panic seized her. She backed away, her hands trembling. "I'm not your wife. I never was. Your father's signature says otherwise, he said, pulling a folded document from his coat. Now, are you going to come quietly, or must I make a scene? The scene, however, was inevitable. Jedediah grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. Ilara cried out, a sound of pure terror that cut through the midday quiet. People began to stop in the street, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. The cry reached the smithy. For Caleb, it was a sound that broke through the fog of his fear. It didn't matter what Silas threatened. It didn't matter what the town thought. Ilara was in trouble. He burst out of the smithy, Silas a step behind him, a smirk on his face, ready to watch the show. Caleb saw Jedediah dragging a struggling Ilara into the town square. Something inside him snapped. The carefully constructed walls of his penance crumbled into dust. "Let her go!" Caleb's voice boomed across the square, stopping everyone in their tracks. Jedediah turned, an arrogant sneer on his face. "And who are you to give me orders? This woman is my runaway wife," the townsfolk gasped, murmuring amongst themselves. They looked from Jedediah's expensive suit to Ilara's terrified face. This was the moment. The precipice! Caleb could fight. He could use the violence he knew so well. But he looked at Ilara, at her fear, and he knew that wasn't the answer. Violence would only prove he was the man she feared him to be. He had to use the truth. He walked into the center of the square, his steps heavy but sure. He stopped a few feet from them, his eyes locked on Ilara, ignoring everyone else. "He's right to call me out," Caleb said, his voice ringing with a painful clarity. "You should all know who I am. My name is Caleb Kane, my brother and I. We led the Kane gang. We robbed banks and trains. The posters that offer a reward for the Kane killer. That's me," a collective shock rippled through the crowd. The sheriff's hand moved instinctively to his gun. Silas watched, his smirk faltering, confused. This wasn't part of his plan. "I came to this town to escape that man," Caleb continued, his gaze never leaving Ilara's. "I tried to bury him, but you can't bury the truth. And the truth is, I was a bad man. Maybe I still am. But meeting Ilara, loving her, it showed me what it means to be good. It made me want to be worthy of standing in the sun next to her." He then turned his stormy eyes on Jedediah. "You have a piece of paper. A contract. You think that gives you the right to own her. But love isn't a contract you sign. It isn't about ownership. It's about seeing someone's worn-out scissors and wanting to make them a new pair. It's about protecting them, even if you're scared you'll only bring them darkness." Tears were streaming down Ilara's face. Caleb's confession, his raw public vulnerability, had given her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She wrenched her arm from Jedediah's grasp. "He's right," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "My father signed that paper to pay a debt. This man, Jedediah, he didn't want a wife. He wanted a possession. I ran because I believe my life is my own. I ran to be free." She looked at Caleb, her heart bare for all to see. "And this man," she said, her voice softening, "his past is full of shadows. But his heart is true. He has shown me more kindness with a single glance than Jedediah has in his entire life." The town was silent, captivated. The sheriff looked from the outlaw to the runaway bride, and then to the wealthy bully. He saw a man confessing to his crimes to save the woman he loved, and a woman finding her voice to claim her own life. He stepped forward, his decision made. "Jedediah," the sheriff said, his voice firm, "in this town we believe in second chances. That paper means nothing here. Now get out of redemption before I find a reason to lock you up." Jedediah, sputtering with rage and disbelief, saw the hardened faces of the townsfolk. He was beaten. With a final venomous glare, he turned and stormed away. Across the square, Silas stood stunned. He had come to blackmail his brother, to drag him back into the darkness. Instead, he had witnessed his brother's redemption. He saw the way Caleb and Ilara looked at each other, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a pang of something other than greed. He saw a kind of wealth he could never steal. Without a word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving the past to fade into the dust behind him. The crowd slowly, quietly began to disperse, leaving Caleb and Ilara alone in the middle of the street. The silence was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was a clean, quiet space, waiting to be filled. Their secrets were out, laid bare under the Texas sun. There was nothing left to hide behind. He took a hesitant step towards her. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" she asked, taking a step towards him. "For being a man who fights for what he loves? For showing me that my past doesn't have to be my prison." They met in the middle of the street. He gently cupped her face, his calloused thumbs wiping away her tears. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "For the man I was? Only if you can forgive me," she replied, "for ever being afraid of the good man you are." He leaned his forehead against hers, a shudder of relief passing through his entire body. The weight he had carried for years, the guilt and the shame, began to lift, dissolving into the warm afternoon air. Under the vast, endless sky, a wanted outlaw and a runaway bride found their redemption, not in a new town or a new name, but in each other's arms. Months later, the sound of a hammer on steel was a joyful rhythm, often accompanied by the happy hum of a sewing machine from the shop next door. Caleb's strong hands now built cradles and fixed wagon wheels, while Ilara's gentle fingers stitched wedding dresses and baby blankets. Their love story became a quiet legend in redemption, a story of two broken souls who, by facing their pasts together, had forged a future brighter than any prairie sunrise. They had learned that true love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being seen for who you were, scars and all, and being loved not in spite of them, but because of them.